and welcome to the Community Collective TCG channel. This is the V-Road Podcast, episode 1. And before we get into too much, we should probably tell you guys who we are. We're just two card game players from the Midwest who have a lot of hobbies, but had enough of a respect of this wonderful card game to focus it on Vanguard.
Vanguard is definitely a game worth a lot of respect, and I don't know where I'd be without it. That's where I'm saying.
How long have you been with the game?
Well, I got started pretty much like January, February of 2017. Started playing this very scrappy Legion Dimension Police deck. It was pretty interesting, you know. Mecha, can't go wrong with that, growing up a Gundam fan. So it was an interesting one. Then we learned about G at one of our local card shops here, and I started playing Messiah, which, to be fair, I did not enjoy at all. Stride was
really?
a mechanic that I did not like at first. It took me a while to get used to it. It made the game difficult, number-wise, I think. Guarding got really difficult, and especially for someone who never really played much of card games.
Well, what got you into Vanguard then, if you weren't big on card games?
Well, I had collected cards. So Pokemon cards, Yu-Gi-Oh cards. I enjoyed the art, but my younger brothers never really enjoyed it as much as I did and never wanted to learn the rules. So when we would play, we'd always make up some rules as we kind of went along, which it was always for fun, never really for anything, and didn't even realize there were really card shops. It was all Walmart and, you know, little Dollar General packs that we could buy and collect as there and then trade with other kids at school. But Vanguard was one that actually a buddy of mine introduced me to the anime, and from there it was we had to give it a try. It was a very interesting concept. We liked the animation style and the art, and it was one of those ones that took us pretty quickly, actually. Like I said, after G got started, Messiah was that first one, and then I got the Toshiki Kai Legends deck. And that's the Dragonic Overlord, the Legend. That was what got me. As soon as I started playing that deck, and we actually started finding out that there was local tournaments, I ended up playing that deck in the local tournaments, and that's what got me hooked. My buddy, when he first taught me how to play the game, told me I wasn't going to like the first 10 games of Vanguard. And I still say that to this day, but I feel like it's a lesser number now. It's probably about 3 games. So once you learn the mechanics, which almost any card game now is that same kind of way.
What about the Legend made it click in your head? It's like, oh, this game's pretty cool.
Well, I'd always been a fan of, like, the dragon cards. And Toshiki Kai, in the anime, was just that kind of quiet badass. And, you know, as a young adult in reality, he just kind of clicked with me, and having all the dragons, his ability to, especially Dragonic Over the Legend, you have to stride at least once to go into your, generation break. But that first skill where you can still just discard a card, attack a rear guard, get triple drive, and restand again, and just that multi-attack ability with big power. The discard 3 was a heavy cost, but it didn't make me feel like I had to go into my strides to win the game, which I thought, coming from a Legion deck that was very, very bad, it felt weird to go to strides. But ever since, it's just been, needed.
Yeah, sure. I remember when I first got into the game, was around the G era, and right at the end, right when like set 14 came out, and the first product I ever bought was the Neo Alter Ego Messiah trial deck, and then from that I was like, okay, Link Joker's really cool, but I'm not like huge on this Messiah guy. So I moved on to Chaos. I saw that there was a clan booster of only Link Joker cards. I went to my locals like every other day and bought like a box or two until I could build that deck out like from scratch. But the reason I even found this game was because there was a friend of mine who was really into the anime, and at a convention I went to in the area, they showed me how to play it. They had the original like Hari and Night Rose trial decks. Mm-hmm. They had me play the Hari one. I had no idea what I was looking at. I had played Magic for since like 2014, and I'm at this convention in like 2018. And I don't think I understood a single thing about how my friend taught me how to play, but I loved the art so much that in the vendor hall of that convention, I bought packs of Set 14, and I opened like a SP Dragobus Luard. And I was like, okay, this feels very, very Yu-Gi-Oh to me, but in a way that kind of like resonates with my idea of like, all right, the Vanguard it's supposed to represent you, and I think the idea of that, regardless of like how it's represented in rules, is always just very appealing in terms of like player expression.
Oh,
but
100%.
So if you started in, you said you started in G.
It was like, yeah, in G. So it's 2017. I mean, I think Strides came out and started in 2016. It was like early 2017, but we didn't realize that G was a thing. Like it was only 3 of us in our little friend group who played it together. We didn't even realize that they had a card shop nearby that sold any of the cards. And then inevitably we did find our local shop that had some small tournaments. They were only 5-man tournaments in reality. Another group of people that played the game, and that's when we're like, okay, we could play this a little more seriously. We could get into that weekly routine of it. But yeah, G's gone, but still loved.
But then we got into V, and V was where I had a really big bulk of my time playing the game, or not so much anymore nowadays, because I never stopped playing after G into V and all that, and going into their current format. So I wouldn't say anymore this was the bulk of my time in playing the game, but it definitely where I got my hours in. I grinded my locals like every week, and for the longest time, I was playing my boy Mordred Phantom. I was such a I think when I got into the game, I was like, okay, Link Joker is that edgy clan. I can tell. I'm not gonna like feed into the archetype of like that character who's in, or like that player that's into all the edgy stuff and only plays like the super dark color scheme, stuff like that. But it didn't take long for me to sort of find my way into all the clans I really liked but stayed away from because it felt, number one, they were going to be too expensive, because like those super popular ones, like back in the day, like Shadow Paladin, Gold Paladin, Angel Feather. Oh man, I was really big into like Aqua Force, and like a lot of those clans, like some of them weren't even like good, but they were popular as far as like their aesthetic went. So it just felt a bit harder to get into them. But then when Mordred Phantom came out, that was the first time I ever got a case of a set. And I remember my group at the time, we went up to, I believe it was Arkansas, and we opened that case there with a buddy from Arkansas who had a piece of it. And that was when we opened a Blaster Dark XVR. And I still have that card to this day. It's one of my favorite cards art-wise. And like it has a lot of memories to me. So now I just can't get away from Shadow Paladin. Even if I don't play it now, it comes up a lot.
Yep. Oh yeah.
But well, what was your experience with V?
V for me, it was unfortunately kind of a short-lived stint. I got into V, and set 1 of V was the first time I ever bought a case of Vanguard. I bought into the Dragon Empire split with 4 other people in my group. We split it all evenly. It was pretty good. Dragonic Waterfall was actually really fun. I hesitated getting into V just because of the imaginary gifts. I kind of struggled with that mechanic. And that's unfortunately kind of my Vanguard story, is when a new mechanic kind of comes out, like from Legion into G and then G into V. It all felt tough. Like it was just a process to learn. Unfortunately, even now, and the transition of adding energy, it's still just not, the muscle memory isn't there because it takes that time to build it. But V, I probably played the first 3 sets, didn't really buy much into it. I built all of the decks from set 1 with extra stuff. Started building a deck from set 2, and then by the time set 3 came out, they had announced Vanguard 0, and that was where I was like, oh, they're gonna reboot the game again on us. I had this very bad feeling, and at that point in time, yeah,
Okay.
I just was very apprehensive about spending more money into a game when they're trying to change the rules again for a mobile game. It felt a little off to me that Bushy was doing that. And at that point in time, it was where I first got my first like real adult job, where I was working 40 hours a week. I was also taking, going class outside of work, and it just got too much to try to keep up with the card game. So I actually left Vanguard for a while there, actually for quite a while, and it hurt, but yeah, it was one of those ones. 0 stayed on the phone. I played it there, but that was about it.
So right after set 3, you fell off? Is that what you're saying?
I was like right around set 3. We played it a little bit, didn't stay too long, but I still enjoyed it. I watched videos on it all the time when I could, when I was traveling for work, but it just was something I couldn't play.
When did you hop back in then?
Coming back into Vanguard, it was right at set 8 of D standard now. It was a big gap from set 3.
Wow, set 8. Oh, okay.
V to set 8. Yeah, Minerva Rising was what brought me back. And only reason why it brought me back was because a buddy of mine had been hounding me since set 5 to get back into the game, which only a couple months span, but he was a big Minerva fan, and he decided he was going to buy a case. And in Minerva Rising, it had both Maelstrom and Lukir, which were 2 decks that I did have in the G era before we transitioned out of it. And he said, look, I'm buying this case. I have 2 decks for you to play. You won't have to do anything for them. They're yours. And I didn't really get a choice of getting back into the game. He kind of said, hey, I'm coming to your house. We're going to open this case here. And that happened. And of course, all the nostalgia come rushing back, opening packs, being excited, deck building, which is absolutely the best part of the game. And yeah, that nostalgia wave hit me like crack. Built Maelstrom and Lukir that night. Learned how to play the new version with the ride decks, all of that, and unfortunately, I can't say unfortunately. I haven't looked back since. It's been
it is so weird to hear you say that now, because in our locals group, you're the one that has all like so many decks. You have like too many to like possibly play in one month, maybe a fair amount each. And we give you shit about it, but it says a lot that you like the game enough to do that. Especially if you had such a big break from it.
Yeah, it was, too long of a break, but it was one of those ones. Yeah, as soon as it came back, I knew who I was as a person, because in G, I was that person too. I built all the decks. We would buy bulk lots of cards where we could, and just build all of the decks we can. Even if they weren't great, they would still be fun, because you would get mechanics that you didn't get in your normal decks. Like, I transitioned from Overlord to Blade Master, and all the above, and I built Thavis, I built Blue Wave, I built Lukir, all the, like, kind of just transitioned between all of those decks. So coming back to D when Maelstrom was there, it was fun mechanic to get back into the multi-wave attacking, even though it's not really waves now, it's just attack order, but it was, a trap card that I definitely landed on, and here I am, so.
Yep. Um, what is it? Did you ever keep up with any other formats besides Standard? I know even throughout... So, by the time we had switched into Standard, the only V decks I really had was Gurguit and Gavril, and I ended up converting both of them into premium decks. And maybe got rid of... I think I had Thavas also at one point that I made during Standard, but I only played it so much and then got rid of it because, most people don't have... Or they get the feeling that they have too many decks, so they'll get rid of them. But, yeah, I don't know if you ever tried to look into premium or V premium or anything, or... Because if you're telling me gifts and, like, striding put you off, I guess maybe not.
Oh, I mean, looking back now, I enjoy it, and on the occasion will play it with people who have decks. I haven't upgraded any of mine. There are a couple decks that I did sell off when we were leaving the G era and going into V. It was actually before they even announced that there was going to be a premium format that I was like, oh, these cards are never going to be used again. So there were a couple decks that I did sell off. And some individual cards as well. I still do have 2 of my G decks. I have a Blue Wave deck that I just couldn't sell. It's still fun, but not up to date at all. Not V Premium at all. And then I still have my original Toshiki Kai Legends deck, still sleeved in its box. It's actually back in the shelf over here, waiting.
You gotta push that into Overlord the Cross deck, because that deck doesn't even stride half the time. It still just uses Legion, and it just takes either like D version or V version of the end, and just attacks you like 4 times, and it's
it's
maybe
it's
that's
one of
more
those,
your speed.
With me having currently 58 decks in Standard, it's one of those ones where I really should have at least one V Premium deck. And obviously, I do think it would be Overlord if I had gone to do it. But when it comes to Standard, I keep building them. Like, today is the release day for Set 2.
Yeah, it is.
And I will be building 13 decks from this set, which there are 13 decks from this set. So, it's a little tough to say. I will guarantee that I will build a V Premium deck when I think the format of Standard, and the reason why I have stayed through so long, is that they've fixed a lot of problems that G and V had. I think the ride deck is the biggest saving grace to Vanguard there is. The amount of consistency with it. I can't tell you how many times I had to ride a perfect guard as my grade 1 in G. It used to bother the ever living heck out of me, and it is something that I never have to do again. And my only reluctancy again going back to building a V Premium deck.
Hey, now we've got those grade 2 promos that, like, at the beginning of your ride phase, if you're grade 1 or lower, I think, you can discard it and look at the top 3 or top 5 or whatever and grab, like, a grade 2 or less. So at the very least, as far as it goes at that, they made those being in the game have made that problem not go away, but it happens way less.
Oh, yeah. It's definitely one to contemplate getting back into, and I think I will cave eventually. It's just when I get close enough to the ledge and I actually fall off where that is. So we'll
okay, well, what are we playing now? I know a lot of my current locals runs is with Reziel, especially now. I've taken a bit of a break from him just to play other things, so I'm only playing the same thing every week. But with his new grade 2 coming out, I really want to see if I can, like, push that deck into, like, game states where, man, if I just had the crit as my last heal, or if my drive checks actually, like, did something, that would give this deck, like, the pressure it needs. And now I think it will have that. So I think it's really worth testing out.
Yeah, and I think with the Reziel list here with this new grade 2 that's coming in set 2, I think it's going to be nice because it's going to allow people who have been kind of feared of building Reziel due to the cost of its packages being so expensive with the teeth vaults and the order. I think the deck can be played in a more budget state, which is a lot more beginner person friendly, which is a lot of what kind of getting into Divines was in the first place. So I am looking very, very, how do I put it? I'm very excited to see it, I should say.
Yeah, but what are you playing besides that, I guess? Because, 58 decks, you gotta...
Yeah.
Can't be the only thing you're looking forward to.
Well, it should go without saying at this point, I am an Overlord main. So my go-to deck of choice is for sure Dragonic Overlord the End. It's just consistent. Well, I say consistent. That's not necessarily true. But the 4 drive checks, the fairly good hand size that the deck can generate, and then it has just, I think, probably one of the greatest cards in the game, and that is just Drag Raider Halp. I think it is one of, if not the best card in the game, due to the fact that it enables everything and that Overlord wants to do. It keeps it from minusing, like other decks have problems, like Avantgarde, having to restand, discard so many cards. Minerva, ditch, a Genesis unit, and Soul Blast 3. I think the kind of net positive, in a sense, that Halb allows Overlord to get just, hits every spot that it before it came out just was missing, because you didn't keep enough cards in hand. It wasn't worth the 4 drive checks, 3 if you didn't have the actual Overlord and Soul. And then Ardor Hatchet Dragon also being one of those cards that's just great. So Overlord is definitely up there on one of my main decks. But I tend to bounce around a lot. Obviously having 58 decks, there's quite a lot to go through. Obviously Varga is a very good one. Varga Dragras. It is one of the meta leaders for a reason. It's consistent in the sense that you almost always have a counterblast to restand, so you're always at least 4 attacking. Sometimes more depending on your board state. With certain tech cards that you have in there, you plus a lot to hand. You're able to drag games out to the late game, and then when you inevitably get that 4th damage on your opponent, you get that divine skill. And it's hard to go wrong with 3 attack Vanguard, 4 drive checks. So that's kind of where I'm staying towards, but
Sure. Well, I think now that we've gotten a chance to give people a better idea of ourselves, maybe we can go into a little topic I got from Team APS, actually, the guys who make all that like casual Yu-Gi-Oh content. But one of them brought up something really interesting about how that game in particular is really volatile in how playing it at all just makes people really short and aggressive, and the fact that every single game action you take in that game has some point of interaction that your opponent can take advantage of with hand traps and stuff. So, after you do anything, you have to be oh, do you have anything? No. Okay. Oh, you're doing that. Oh, okay. There's so many game actions that you need to do, and so many times that you need to check if your opponent has anything that they can respond with, that it's at a competitive level, it makes it really hard to have a good mood about the game. And what they thought of was the idea that if something like Yu-Gi-Oh is not the only thing you're doing, you have other hobbies outside of that, it can really space out how much you engage with the game and how much you think about the game and what it is. And I think it's been the case for me with Vanguard, where sometimes I will play a little bit too much of the game, and I will get a little too into the motions and sort of hate the fact that triggers can swing a game so wildly, like over trigger or not, like the 6 damage heal, or like, they crit me twice in a row or whatever. But it's when I look at, it's when I try like Shadowverse, like I've been playing a lot of Shadowverse as well. And what that game does differently than Vanguard makes me appreciate Vanguard more. Even more so when I'm playing a game, when I'm trying out like the One Piece card game, because that game is like quite literally, I don't know if you've tried it, but it is literally Vanguard, but a little bit more simplified, and like there's no drive checks that happen with like your Vanguard swinging, but your Vanguard is still like a thing that attacks and you like guard with your hand and stuff. But it's the fact that it's like Vanguard, but it doesn't have drive checks. It makes me really like drive checks more than I already did, and that like, yeah, it can feel bad, but there's also like that dopamine hit that you get that like no other card game can really give you,
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think playing the game a lot definitely can do that, and that's why one of the biggest reasons why is I have so many decks is when I feel that something like that where I'm getting crit sacked, or I feel get frustrated with the game, is I just change up how I like the deck I'm playing, and in my brain it kind of resets that mental, because you have to approach every deck differently. Yes, you're playing the same game of Vanguard, but playing Barrow Magnus versus playing Varga are two completely different mindsets. You have to understand that when you play Barrow Magnus, you're going to get outpaced with many things. But as long as you continue to work towards your goal of hitting what your deck wants to do, and you don't really focus on the outside, parameters, and you just keep focusing on what your deck does, it kind of mentally resets you about those triggers. Yes, those are always going to be a part of the game, and sometimes they suck, but most of the time they're fantastic. So to me, those random bits of moments are part of the game. It's part of the skill. Like skill is luck is a skill, and if you have it, you have it, and sometimes you don't, and there's nothing like it. Shadowverse, Grand Archive, fantastic games in their own rights. Been playing them a good portion myself, and yeah, nothing beats drive checks there.
It's interesting you say that about having shifting your mindset with what deck you play, because a lot of the time when I look at like the set 13 meta that we are thankfully not in anymore, I didn't hate it because I was like a dirty Youthquake player, so I played Full Blast and I killed people before they got to grade 3 and all that. But yep. The idea for me was, even if I know the way I'm killing my opponent isn't exactly fun for them, there is only so much that like you can do about that, really. And it's the thing of like, lately I've been playing a lot of Leonore, and that deck really, sometimes in some matchups, they really just die on the dice roll. Like, every game I go first, I can get to a Vivace sooner. I can actually do a Vivace turn. I can draw a lot off of that with stuff like Luster Impact Dragon and stuff like that. But getting there is such a really tight funnel that if you go second, usually you don't get far enough after your first grade 3 turn because it's not super substantial. But what always helps me with decks like those, because they're not really fun for me to play, but what helps me like get with those is the fact that like they are designed that way on purpose. Their fourth turn is really explosive and strong, and I think it's always worth how it feels to get to that turn, to sit with all the in-between. And even last locals I played Leonore, and I really wanted to try to maximize my like early turns, my grade 1 and 2 turns, and in a deck that has a lot of grade 1s, that was actually very easy to do, but it just wasn't something I tried super hard to do, because especially when there's stuff like Varga and, we're about to get other stuff that removes cards, I think. I don't remember. But there's always like the one guy who plays the removal heavy deck. Like Prison, stuff like that. Prison especially sucks.
Gandiva.
But yeah, Gandiva, true. Yeah. But decks like those, I always get afraid of like overcommitting. But then I forget that like, if I overcommit and I do, at the very least, make him guard a lot, their hand is smaller. And I'm noticing nowadays that like decks tend to have a lot of pieces they kind of need to get out their really potent turns. Especially like Rezile, like if you make them have to guard with a Teeth Fold in their hand and they don't have it to build their board with, so like stuff like that. So that really helped me, because while I do agree with Team APS in that like, taking a break from the game can really help you in like spacing out how you interact with it and like how you engage with it, I think I'm a little clinically insane like you are, and that I think I can enjoy this game regardless of what's going on. Yeah. I think it's very rare, if I'm being honest, but what helps me do that is like thinking about like, okay, Varga is gonna kill me on any turn I let them get me to 4 damage. So I just need to play around that, and if I'm not able to play around that, that is sort of on me. It's not like I can expect that, it's because I drew a bad hand and because they drew a good hand. No, I like to think that, like you said earlier, there's skill in this game, and if you have it, you have it. So I think there's always a way to play around something.
Yeah, I mean, my father used to say it when he would coach us in sport, any given Sunday, and it's kind of a weird way of saying that any team or any deck can face another deck and win in any chance you can. And that's why I do love playing low tier decks in this game, because they are so fun. There are so many not great fun decks that can still put up fights if you play them well. You still have to pilot them well, and things sometimes do have to fall in place for them to be like played perfectly. But I mean, when that happens, it happens, and there's nothing better than beating a Varga with Barrow Magnus. I mean, like things like that.
I know. Last week you played Silhouette at locals.
Yep, Silhouette was fun. That was an interesting one. The current Silhouette is not fantastic, but the new promo that just came out for this month of June and this next month of July helps the deck all the much more. It got it over just that little peak that Silhouette needed, that 15k to the arm, like 15k attacking on the arms to make them be able to even just hit over that 13k Vanguard, made all the difference. So you are guaranteeing your 4 or 5 attacks without boost on those first kind of round of attacks. And I mean, I played some tough decks with it, and had some losses and had some wins, but ultimately, like, I mean, you can play. I took every game in a best of 3 to best of 3. There was way for me to squeak out wins, and there was 2 games that I lost that I absolutely misplayed and could have guarded better and had done better things, but I can't really blame that on anyone else other than myself. So that frustration, I feel like I've gotten pretty good about getting over, because you can't play the game perfectly 100% of the time. It's almost impossible, but it feels great when you do. And you see a line and a path to play through, and you just hit it, and it works. But.
Yeah, a lot of the time, I think people look at this game, and especially when they play it themselves and they played enough, and they're like, oh man, guarding is really easy. Oh man, he's going for he's got like a 28k column, and I'm on my grade 3, so I'll put out this 20k front. Like, that always feels obvious, but especially with decks coming out now, there's a lot of different ways that you like have to guard things that if you don't, you will just get blown up. Like, Chris Rain isn't an insane deck by any stretch of the imagination, but if you are not ready for its divine skill, both parts of it, where she's going to be huge, and then the thing she calls after she bounces her own board is going to be pretty huge as well. Yep. Upwards of like 3 crit and like 60k and like crazy stuff like that. Like, it's one thing to guard a Vanguard with a crit and be like, oh, that's easy, PG it. That's fine, cool. But it's another thing to, have stuff set aside for the rear guard it calls. And I think that applies to a lot of decks. It's because I always see when anybody plays, like, I don't know, Dragonic Overlord, or I'm trying to think, decks that like give their Vanguard a crit, give their own Vanguard a crit.
Yeah.
Those decks, it always feels super obvious to PG their Vanguard, and a lot of the times it is. And I know some people complain that, like, all my Vanguard is good at doing is making my opponent PG it. Like, what's the point? That, like, it doesn't feel like a very strong attack. Like, I don't know if enough people realize how important a PG in this game is in this game. And even if you draw into all of them over the course of a game, even if you draw into just enough to make sure that your opponent's Vanguard actually isn't that threatening in the grand scheme of things, that won't happen every game. It just won't. And you can't plan around that at all.
I mean, there are some decks that allow you to cheat it, and you can have them a little bit more consistently. Overlord, as an example, has a grade 1 skill that literally counterblast lets you search for a grade 1. Fantastic skill. You can almost guarantee you always have one. But that's just one of 50 cards. I mean, there's still 49 of the cards that you have potential to get to hand. And if you don't see your other 3 cards, I mean, the other 3 PGs, you can be hooped. But yes, PGs are necessary and hit or miss if you get them. It's tough sometimes.
Yeah, because it always loops around into the fact that Standard has so low shield value, and that says nothing about PGs really. But the fact that I think my only true criticism of Standard is the low shield value. I think when I look at the meta we're in now, especially with decks like a Reziel and Nightmare Dolls running around, I would actually I hesitate to say that the format should have had more shield in general, because those Direful Dolls having 10k shield base on their grade 1s, I don't know, there gets to a point where that's just a bit too much. But at the same time, I do look at decks that pump out like 60k columns or very consistent like 38k columns or whatever. All the times that I see, even like a low tier deck is off and they die because they're off by like 5k shield.
Yeah.
And that just didn't happen in V, really, especially because everything was in increments of 10k. And I don't know. I guess this is like a standard rant, but I also don't really care too much for the fact that people complain about, like, oh, this card just gives itself 5k, or this gives something else 5k. It's just 5k. It's like, I would still always prefer that than the amount of 10ks that V just, like, gave to every single card under the sun. Like, everything gave 10ks in like increments, or to go with their force markers, or their Excel markers. Like, they just pumped 10k on everything. It was ridiculous, especially with decks like I don't know if you ever read what Glory Maelstrom did in V.
Yep.
Yeah, but he gave your front row 10k and made it so that they can only guard with one card at a time, which sounds like okay, but it was pretty brutal. And I think I'm okay with games ending at a reasonable amount of turns with the shield we have than pretending that we need more shield. I think the issue we've had is the lack of defensive options, and now that we're getting those set orders in the reprint set that can let you guard with stuff from your drop zone or whatever, and then it binds it afterwards. I think that's going to be helpful to the decks that can really make good use of it, like Leonord and stuff.
Yeah. I think... like you were saying earlier with the set 13 meta and then going into Divine, set 13 was so fast. Like, there were a lot of games that were just ending, before opponents were getting to grade 3. Sometimes they had a grade 3 turn, they were dying on that grade 4 turn, which on a grade 4 turn, or your 4th turn, not grade 4 turn, makes kind of sense to, that should be your kill turn, because that's kind of how the game should be. Because you don't want games to go for 45 minutes every game. You also don't want 5-minute games. So it was finding a tough balance, but coming into Divines and them adding the energy generator was a big step to that. Because like you said, we don't have a whole lot of defensive options, and our shield numbers and things are kind of off, but they kind of like counteracted that with the amount of cards we draw, because there were a lot of low tier decks that had that problem. They just couldn't keep up because they were 5k shield off just off of like the amount of cards in hand. But that additional, one card a hand, sometimes multiple if you go late game, just from having the EB7 ability, helped so much to everything. Yeah, the bad decks that had trouble guarding, got the one more turn or maybe two more turns because of that card. Whereas the good decks still just have an additional card to do more things with. But there's only 6 board slots from between Vanguard and 5 Rearguard. There's only really so many you can play. So it, kind of helped the lower guys more than it helped the big guys. And it's been a necessary evil, I think, to the game. Helped just with the shielding in general. And there are some good cards coming out. Like the new Rora promo is a 10k shield for a deck that is, hey, I'm going to commit a lot to board here early on. I'm going to rush, and if we go late game, I'm kind of screwed. That shield helps just that little bit more, live things there, but doesn't make it, broken by any stance.
Yeah, I agree. And it's also the thing about going back again to the set 13 meta. That format was really fast, but it also had a lot of decks that either needed to go second or needed to go first because they needed to get to their grade 4 turn. I love to reference Different Fights video where he talked about that, and he had this chart about there was like Leonore and Drajul that were like the slower decks. They needed to get to their turn 4. That's when they did a lot of pressure. Then they had like the fast decks like Jiva and Youthberg, and those just like popped off immediately on turn 3. Also like Mygo and stuff, because that was in that set for Japan and stuff.
Oh well, Japan, yes. Here in Divines for us. That there was a lot of fast decks. I mean, even Orphis kind of fell into that with Mask.
Sure.
I mean, great deck. It just could fall into that. It wouldn't consistently kill on that first grade 3 turn, but it had a very good opportunity to. I mean, 15k shadow tokens are always going to be good.
I think what I'm trying to get at though is that like even in that format where in hindsight we'll say it was pretty fast, there was also just a lot of stuff that wasn't, but was still really strong. Especially when you think about how right after set 13 they got a Lyrical set 4 right before Divine started, and that had a Siana in it, and that deck topped because it was a slow deck. It didn't kill very quickly, but it also just had like a really good, floodgate's the wrong word, but it had a sort of ability that you did have to play around.
Yeah. In
the same way that a lot of decks nowadays that are coming out of Divines have those sort of like defensive things like Darful Dolls and Reziel in a sense, and decks like those. And I always think about how you almost wish we got stuff like that way sooner. But I guess they had to print like their 84th 5 attack stand all the guys deck before we got that,
Yeah, I mean it definitely felt there for a while that we needed more less 5 attack decks, which I mean is a necessary evil to the game. I mean, when you pump out low numbers on attacks, you have to have more attacks. But at the same time, they could have transitioned and gotten along further in the meta faster than what they did. But that's one downside, I think, to our card game, is that the fact that it does follow an anime. So they have a set schedule based off of a story in a card game for an anime. So they can't just say, oh, hey, we're going to drop this set, 2 weeks after this set because we can. It wouldn't make sense in the story to the anime. So it makes it kind of tough, but also thematically fun because we get to play alongside the characters. and enjoy the cards that they did when they got them.
Yeah, especially when how right now in at least American or the TCG for Yu-Gi-Oh, like they don't have an anime right now. Like they finished Vrains, and there's like the Rush Duel anime that's only in Japan, and that is supporting like the Rush Duel format, which we also don't have, and it's just it reminds. I don't think Yu-Gi-Oh will die from not having an anime, but when you come out the gate with one, like Vanguard did, and Yu-Gi-Oh did, when you get to the point where you don't have that, you do lose something that's like impossible to replace. Like my favorite deck in that game is Code Talkers, and that's because half the reason is because the main character of Vrains played it, and I really like that character, and all those things. And it's like that applies to Vanguard too, and there are a lot of decks that I like because of the character that plays them. Mm-hmm. And seeing them in an anime, it does something that I think, card games like Magic and Shadowverse won't be able to like keep me hooked as well with, because like Shadowverse, it's also made by Bushiroad, and like the art is really good, and I like the gameplay and all that, but there's no deck I can really like identify with the way I do with like any Shadow Paladin deck or whatever, because I really liked Ren when I got into the game. He was just a neat character.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yep. And same here with me and Toshiki Kai. I got the Legend deck because of him. It was his deck in the game, so I got it in real life, and that was, an interesting feeling, because having someone to relate to a character, and not necessarily like copy them, but you can see like kind of while watching the anime, you can see their methodology. Obviously, they talk about their deck and they kind of play it a specific way, but then you figure out how to kind of play it slightly differently, but also use things that they do in the anime. And there's some of that deck building wise, like there are some some cards and decks when a deck came out in the anime that no one ever ran because it wasn't in the meta, or the deck list that people enjoyed didn't follow those cards. But again, not everything has to follow to the anime. It's very fantastic to have that relatability. Again, like Yu-Gi-Oh losing it, I don't fear for the game. Their fans are fantastic. Bandai and all that are fantastic companies that are going to be able to continue to produce the card game no problem. But it's going to be a different story.
I will correct myself. Shadowverse does have an anime, but I think the decks that are in them show up very rarely in the card game itself. I know like set 2, I think, had the first instances of the decks from the anime in them and stuff like that. But there's just
watched yet.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I ever will either, and maybe that makes me a hypocrite, but when, and I think that's an issue that Yu-Gi-Oh has now as well, is that even if it had an anime now, all the decks that people are playing now aren't tied to anything. I know they've like retroactively like tied really old decks to newer characters, and that's kind of cool, but it's really hard to take a deck in Shadowverse or Yu-Gi-Oh and tie that to anything when there's nothing that the company themselves have made for it. And I know it's not that easy, but it does go a really long way to enjoy the game as we do with Vanguard.
Yeah, and there's something to be said about that. We have that some in Vanguard as well. Lyrical Monasterio is Monasterio. I don't know why I said Mon, but either way, it's something that we don't have in the anime. There are some decks played within it, but
I'll push up my glasses. There's the one character that plays Kyoka.
One that plays Kyoka. But
never played a single game on screen, but she does play it.
Very seldomly in Vanguard currently do we have characters that play lyrical, and there are people. I mean, I have 4 lyrical decks myself. I enjoy them all. And I do think they all have fantastic things. And I think it does give Bushy the ability to kind of, deviate and add creative things to the game that, might go against like a storyline. Like, it just some things like Celestial, as an example. It's a very fun mechanic, having a unit bound, having, different abilities from different cards based off of what is bound. It's a fantastic ability. It's not necessarily great, but it's like mechanically it's fun. It's sound, it's got a good idea, but in an anime that would be hard to portray.
Sure.
Like, and making sure that the casual viewer of it would understand, okay, here's the rules of the game, but also here's this whole thing they're doing outside of the rules. And just make it noticeable enough that anyone could kind of pick up the anime and follow along. Can be kind of tough. So there's definitely creative grounds to be explored because of not having it in the anime, but also,
And we finally started to go the other direction. We've got like Chris Rain, played by a pretty, not a super important character in the anime, but somebody important enough to have a faded one, and now we're getting the destined one. We've got a lyrical boss for that too, so at least they're finally recognizing that it exists. They're putting it in main sets, and that does a lot for it too.
That helps so much, and it fills in kind of a niche. Like there was just at one point in time there were so many random commons and cards that just never got touched, and still to this day don't get touched in previous sets because they were just kind of throwing in filler cards, which was nice. They were cheap budget alternatives for things, but having in that true sixth clan in there, it allows for some pretty easy, even splits on people who divide cases. It allows them to add better cards that are more geared towards that set, or a support card for another deck from a previous set, without having to throw in just a bunch of random cards per se. So we're in a good spot, I think.
Yeah, I think that being said, speaking of lyrical, we've had a pretty interesting deck being shown off last Thursday. And I don't know if you have it up anywhere on your screen. If you want to read it for us, you can.
Absolute Zero Sagata. Yeah, this Harpy girl, she is going to be honestly pretty good and very difficult to play against.
Okay.
Her first skill, continuous Vanguard Circle. All of you and your opponent's units get continuous Vanguard / Rearguard. If it's the fourth battle of this turn or more when this unit would attack, it cannot attack unless you discard a card from hand. And that skill to me, so as a person who owns multiple multi-attack decks, Maelstrom being my big one, that is killer.
Yeah, this skill alone just says a lot about the kind of deck it's going to be.
Yeah.
Especially because it applies to itself as well.
I think if it just had that skill alone as a Vanguard, it would already still be pretty good. Like, I might be a little crazy there. Having the second skill that it does makes it all the better. Once per turn, Energy Blast 4, and this unit gets power plus 10k and drive plus 1. I will say, having another card added to Vanguard that is not triple drive and is only drive plus 1 is kind of frustrating.
Oh yeah? Okay.
Yeah, it just like I think there are a lot of things that should be triple drive and have that consistency. I know there's a cost to it, and it's Energy Blast 4 to get to it. But I feel that the skill should say triple drive on it instead of drive plus 1.
So you want more decks like Nirvana Jiva that have something that
correct.
It makes triple drive.
It makes Elementaria a card that is not necessarily a required card, but at tournaments and things along those lines at a highly competitive stands, you pretty much have to run it, because as soon as you run into a stride deck or a grade 4 deck, you want to have it. But playing against decks that are drive +1 get around that, and it feels just kind of gross. Like, I mean, yes, it forces you to drive, and I understand that there is a different math to it, but it should be that the skill gives drive, triple drive instead of drive +1. Because
you just kind of want Elementaria to justify itself if it's going to be such an auto include.
Yeah, I think, and it's not necessarily even just that. I feel like there are also, some other cards that play around triple drive a little better, and it just feels like they're kind of copying out some of these decks from Elementaria and certain things that are specifically against triple drive, which it's something to be said that it's a tough skill and it's very good, and I get that there is a difference between drive +1 and triple drive. It just feels like they should consolidate that to try to be one skill. Like, if you're getting that, you're getting the new skill versus adding on a drive. There are cards like Sequana for Youthwork that makes sense, where it like sets the drive to 1, or Gust, where it adds a drive. Like, those kinds of things make sense when you're coming from a lower standard of like base drive checks and you're doing that. But if you're already 2 drives and you're adding a drive, it should be triple drive. That's just a small side rant, but
yeah, I mean, I can get it. I don't know if Rezile really needs its divine skill to say, oh, it gets triple drive instead of drive +1, for the sake of that. On any given turn, I guess it might not be that much different if they PG your Vanguard swing with Rezile when you pop the divine skill, or you Elementaria it instead, and then they're like, oh, I don't have to discard, that's cool. Like, I guess it wouldn't really be like too different in the grand scheme of things, but I almost worry about the decks where like all they do is get drive +1, like this one. I think on a deck like a Rezile, where it's got a lot of moving pieces and it needs to like, and it can do things outside of the fact that it has a drive check, because it has that drive check that one time. So I think in that instance, I don't think I see anything wrong with it just getting triple drive. Maybe that can balance out the divine skill in some way.
Yeah, I think 100%. Well, actually, I kind of disagree with what you just said there at the end.
Okay.
But for the most part, I think the drive +1 on Rezile makes sense. It is a one-time thing. The
Really?
real skill, the
Okay.
real part of that skill is to set up the actual divine skill of the critical trigger on 6 damage. You heal. That, I think, is really the skill. The drive +1 is just kind of, hey, we're going to try to set you up here. We know you put all those critical triggers into the deck, so actually we're going to try to make you pull one of them back out of the deck by, pulling another trigger.
So you don't think that it giving itself triple drive would, with Elementaria in mind, you don't think that would balance the divine skill or anything like that?
Not necessarily, because it is a one-time thing. It's like, hey, I'm going to triple drive this one time. In Sagata's instance, where it is I'm getting drive +1 every turn that I have 4 energy, which, isn't going to be every turn of the game, because it's not possible. Unless they do release us here a card for Lyrical that allows them to energy charge very easily, which is a possibility. But EV4 is already a heavy cost. It's getting the power. I think it should be triple drive, because it's that, hey, every turn it's this. It's like striding. I mean, every stride gets that triple drive, because that's what the stride is. So it's a little different in power and energy ability, but I think it essentially is becoming a triple drive every turn, like a stride, without it being a stride. And it feels kind of like a cheap cop out that it's just drive +1.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, hey, this could be a whole another episode about stuff like that, but
yeah.
The rest of what it does is that last skill isn't too bad either.
Yeah. Auto Vanguard Circle once per turn. When your card is discarded from hand by a card ability during your turn, cost counterblast 1, draw a card. I mean, that kind of helps you negate some of that card discard that you will get. So being able to recuperate some cost. And, you know, counterblast to draw a card isn't a, you know, too bad of a cost in most decks. So I think once per turn, I think that's very easy and doable.
I didn't realize it was a once per turn when I first read this card. I kind of thought I could keep, you know, doing it over and over, but I guess that'd be a little too good. I think
it's in a good spot. I think once per turn is very good because it does allow you to discard a card for your PG, counterblast, and draw a card. It just has a card ability, so it's going to be multi-instanced. Where on it does say, well, it just say during your turn, so maybe not. We'll have to see with the actual instance of the card.
They wouldn't let us have it. They wouldn't let us have it. That would have been so cool. Man.
Why did I have to say that?
Well, at least, you know, to support this playstyle, the deck does have a lot of interesting things, like a lot of stuff like this grade 2 that when it's discarded from hand during your turn, it gives a rearguard 5k. You know, that one out of all these hit me to be like the least impressive. But then it actually has access to stuff like a grade 3 that at the end of the battle it attacked, you can retire it and retire at grade 2 or less rearguard of your opponent.
Yeah.
Which always says something about this deck, where if it's asking your opponent to discard past the 4th attack onward, but it also has a removal, that feels like it can add up a lot over time.
Oh, definitely. I mean, retire and you're forcing your opponent, if they're 4th attack, having to discard a card. Most decks anymore, I mean, even all of the new decks from set 2 that are coming out are all 4 attack decks minimum. Like, that's at least one card discarded, or you're purposefully not doing an ability to get that 4th attack. Which there are some decks that are going to be fine with that. That, you know, it's not really going to make that big of a difference, but at the same time, that's if you're retiring and making them discard a card, that's just multiple, like, you're negging them so much.
And it's almost like, you know, if they don't attack with that last card that, like, they could attack with, for the sake of not having to discard with it, especially because this says it's saying like grade 2 or less. Most attacking rearguards nowadays are grade 2, so that's not really that big of a deal. So the idea is, I guess, if they choose not to attack with that card so they don't have to discard, then you can just kind of pop it, so it almost feels like they need to attack with their rearguard if this thing's on the board. You know? Or it'll just get retired and they either did nothing or they at least did something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the way people are going to have to think about playing this deck, or against this deck, is something that most decks don't ask of you.
Yeah, I do think it's going to cause some heartaches and some major migraines to some people, especially with those key cards you need to have for decks. And like you said earlier, Reziel discarding a Teeth Felt, like, that hurts. Like, I mean, yes, you get to call them back from Reziel's skill specifically, but at the same time, if they can't build a board off it when they get to that grade 3 or even on that grade 2 turn, you know, you disrupt so much that it's going to be, I think, a probably not, you know, top of the meta deck, but it's going to pull out a lot of wins against some good decks that should just probably win the matchup. You know, Shiranui, I think, is going to suffer a lot, which is the best deck in the format.
Oh man, I didn't think about that.
Because that's going to become kind of also slightly a ruling nightmare. Shiranui attacking with your opponent's rear guards. Who has to discard the card there? Is it still because Shiranui is enacting the attack that he's going to have to discard the card? Or is it going to be because it's the opponent's rear guard that it's attacking?
So my gut instinct is to say that when you dominate a rear guard it is treated as your card.
Yeah.
So I would assume that the Shiranui player would have to discard.
That would be my thought too.
Yeah.
But, it's just it's gonna screw over a lot, because imagine 7 attacking with Shiranui. If you do your combo correctly, you have to discard 4 cards in those attacks. Your 4th attack, 5th attack, 6th, and 7th. That your triple drive gone. I mean, it's going to be very disruptive and honestly pretty good. So some decks that are going to be very counter: Shiranui, Maelstrom, any of these major multi-attacking decks, Rezael even, 4th attack, 5th attack, Liel coming out set 2, that's 4-attack deck. Miranda, Blagmire, all these decks are attacking at least 4 times. So yeah, it's going to disrupt a lot of gameplay. Blagmire, I think, is going to have a fairly okay matchup against this, specifically because you delete the skill. You're just going to say, hey, actually, all those continuous abilities and everything, I'm going to get rid of them, and that's going to be my turn that I go to kill you. So it can get away with it in the sense that, it could do its setup with 3 attacks, and then once it gets to its actual divine skill to be able to disrupt, that's when it can go for the kill. So I think that actually probably will be a very good matchup into Sagatai here, but there are going to be a lot of bad ones.
I just appreciate that this deck is going to exist at all, and I think we've gone for way too long in this game without having decks that force you to think about how they're playing instead of just focusing on optimizing how you're playing. And while there's nothing wrong with optimizing your own game plan, there is another guy on the side of the table, and it leaves so much on the table to just not go into the design space beyond guarding during your opponent's turn, or how you can influence that. Siana is a really good example. That deck's support isn't insane, so it hasn't been performing very well, but its base concept is really interesting, and the fact that you have to think about what you're gonna do after your rear guard attacks and they just don't guard, or they use one of their trigger in soul 15k skills, stuff like that. And I think the fact that we're getting more and more decks like those that make you have to think about it, because when people complain as much as they do about Prison or probably Blangmire, I'm imagining coming up, it's hopefully people can get more used to the idea of playing around decks like these when there's more of them. So.
Yeah. And this kind of goes back to some of our conversations earlier, talking about how where in Yu-Gi-Oh! And other games like Magic, where there are those kind of reactive abilities where you have to focus on that, where Vanguard has been, like you said, for the most part, completely focused on you run your deck, you have to do what you can. Obviously guarding is its own thing, you have to plan around guarding, but you run your deck how it runs. This, Siana, and a couple other decks that are going to be coming out, are definitely going to introduce that trap card essentially to the game that has you have to focus on the overall game more, which is going to be very fun. It's going to suck at points, and those long game nights where best of 3s are taking forever, you're getting long, it's going to put some stress on you, but it's going to make you a better player, I think, because once you start playing against decks that have you disrupt more on your end, you're going to start to just think about your opponent's deck more. So it's going to be annoying for a while, probably for a long while, but I think overall it will improve your more casual gamer, your more casual card fighter, to be a better card fighter in general.
Hey, and throughout the course of this podcast, however long it lasts, I think that is the one thing that I want to try to help people be, is a better player of this game.
100% agreed.
So that being said, I think that's an episode. So if you stuck around this long, thanks for listening. We're not exactly doing anything too crazy here, but we appreciate it all the same. So maybe consider subscribing or liking this video, or sharing it to other people who like Vanguard or card games in general. And this has been the boys.
Thanks for joining.